Close your eyes and let your mind drift back through the corridors of time, back beyond the noise of our modern world, beyond the rush of centuries, to a place where the desert meets the sky in an endless embrace of gold and azure. Here, where the mighty Nile flows like a silver serpent through an ocean of sand, lies a civilization that has whispered its secrets across 4,000 years. Ancient Egypt. The very name carries the weight of mystery, the scent of frankincense, and the echo of prayers spoken in temples that touched the heavens. Tonight, we journey together into this realm of pharaohs and pyramids, of gods with the heads of animals and mortals who believed they could become eternal. But before we begin this voyage through time, if these ancient whispers speak to your soul, consider subscribing to our channel. Leave a comment and tell us what other mysteries of the past you'd love to explore together. Your presence here, in this moment, connects us across the digital sands of time. Now, dim the lights around you. Let the world fade away. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. Feel yourself sinking into the soft embrace of your bed, as if it were warm sand beneath the desert stars. Tonight, you are not just a listener. You are a traveler through time, a witness to wonders that defy explanation. The desert wind begins to blow, carrying with it the scent of ancient stone and the whisper of secrets that have waited millennia to be told. In the beginning, there was only the river. Picture, if you will, a ribbon of life flowing through an endless sea of golden sand. The Nile, ancient and eternal, carrying within its waters the dreams of a civilization yet to be born. Long before the first pyramid rose from the desert floor, before the first pharaoh claimed dominion over the two lands, there was this river, patient, nurturing, mysterious. The early people who came to its banks found something magical in its rhythm. Each year, as if summoned by the gods themselves, the river would swell with waters from distant lands, flooding the barren earth and leaving behind a gift more precious than gold, rich black soil that would feed a nation for thousands of years. Imagine standing on those ancient banks, your feet bare against the cool mud, watching as the sun rises over waters that stretch to the horizon. The air is thick with the promise of abundance, heavy with the scent of wet earth and growing things. In the distance you can hear the calls of ibises and the gentle lapping of waves against papyrus reeds that sway like dancers in the morning breeze. These first Egyptians, these children of the Nile, understood something profound about the nature of life and death, of abundance and scarcity. They watched the river die and be reborn each year, witnessed the miracle of green shoots pushing through what had been barren ground just days before. In this eternal cycle, they glimpsed the face of the divine. The river taught them about time, not the hurried, anxious time of our modern world, but deep time, cyclical time, the time of seasons and stars. They learned to read the river's moods like a beloved face, to predict its floods by the position of the stars, to work with its rhythms rather than against them. In the pre-dawn darkness, when the world was still draped in silver shadows, the farmers would walk to their fields, their footsteps soft on the damp earth. They carried with them the wisdom of generations, the knowledge of when to plant and when to harvest, when to build and when to rest. The river had taught them patience, had shown them that all things have their season. As the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the river would begin its daily transformation. What had been silver in the moonlight now blazed like molten gold, reflecting the infinite blue of the Egyptian sky. Along its banks, children would play in the shallows, their laughter echoing across the water like music. Women would come to fill their jars, their movements graceful and unhurried, as if they were performing a sacred dance. The river brought more than water and fertile soil. It brought connection. Villages that might have remained isolated in the vast desert were linked by its flowing highway. Boats carved from papyrus reeds would drift along its surface, carrying goods and stories, dreams and ambitions, The river was the great unifier, the force that would eventually bind Upper and Lower Egypt into one magnificent kingdom. In the evening, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the river would take on new colors: deep purple, burnished copper, the soft gray of twilight. This was the time of reflection, when the day's work was done and the people would gather on the riverbank to watch the sun die in the west, knowing with absolute certainty that it would be reborn in the east. They began to see in this daily miracle a truth that would shape their entire civilization. Death was not an ending, but a transformation. Just as the sun died each night only to rise again, just as the river appeared to die each year only to flood again with new life, so too might humans transcend the boundary between life and death. The river whispered to them of eternity, of cycles within cycles, of the possibility that consciousness itself might be as eternal as the flowing water. In its depths, they saw reflections not just of their faces but of their souls, not just of their present but of their future, as beings who might, like the river itself, flow on forever. As darkness settled over the land like a soft blanket, the river would become a mirror for the stars. The ancient Egyptians would lie on their backs on the warm sand, watching the celestial river, the Milky Way, flow across the night sky like a heavenly reflection of their earthly Nile. They began to understand that they lived between two rivers, one of water and one of light, and that their destiny was somehow connected to both. The river had chosen them, they believed, had called them to its banks for a purpose greater than simple survival. They were to be the keepers of mysteries, the builders of monuments that would outlast the very stars, the guardians of knowledge that would illuminate the darkness of ignorance for all time. And so, in the gentle embrace of the river's rhythm, under the watchful gaze of stars that had seen the birth of worlds, the great civilization of ancient Egypt began its slow, magnificent awakening. The river of life had planted the seeds of eternity in the fertile soil of human imagination, and those seeds were about to bloom into wonders that would astound the world. From the mists of prehistory, like figures stepping out of a dream, came the first pharaohs. Imagine the moment when mortal men first dared to claim they were gods walking among humans. Picture the audacity, the divine madness, the profound belief that lifted these early rulers from the realm of the ordinary into the sphere of the eternal. The very air around them seemed to shimmer with possibility, as if reality itself bent to accommodate their extraordinary claims. The first pharaoh, Narmer, stands in the shadow of legend, his name carved in stone and whispered in the wind that blows across the desert. He was the one who united the two lands, Upper Egypt with its crown of white lotus flowers, Lower Egypt with its crown of red papyrus. In his hands he held the sacred scepter that would make him master of both the river and the desert, ruler of a kingdom that stretched from the Mediterranean to the cataracts of the Nile. But Narmer was more than a conqueror. He was a visionary who understood that true power lay not in the sword alone, but in the realm of the spirit. He proclaimed himself the living incarnation of Horus, the falcon god whose eyes were the sun and moon, whose wings cast protective shadows over all of Egypt. When he spoke, it was not merely a man's voice that echoed across the land. It was the voice of divinity itself. The people, weary from centuries of tribal warfare, hungry for unity and peace, found in this God-King a bridge between the world they knew and the world they dreamed of. They looked into his eyes and saw not just human ambition, but cosmic purpose. They knelt before him, not in mere submission, but in recognition of something sacred, something that transcended the ordinary boundaries of human existence. The pharaoh's palace was more than a dwelling. It was a temple where the divine and mortal worlds intersected. Its walls were painted with scenes of the pharaoh in communion with the gods, receiving the ankh of life from celestial hands, being embraced by deities whose forms combined human beauty with animal power. The very architecture seemed to pulse with supernatural energy, as if the building itself were alive and breathing. In the cool pre-dawn hours, when the world was still wrapped in silver shadows, the pharaoh would begin his daily transformation from man to God. Sacred oils would be poured over his skin, their fragrance rising like incense to the heavens. The double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt would be placed upon his head, its weight a constant reminder of the divine responsibility he bore. The false beard of divinity would be bound to his chin, and the crook and flail, symbols of his role as shepherd and protector of his people, would be placed in his hands. This was not mere ceremony, but profound spiritual theater, a daily recreation of the cosmic order. The pharaoh was not pretending to be a god. In these moments he became one. His consciousness expanded to encompass the needs and dreams of millions. His vision extended to see the patterns that connected all life. As the sun rose, painting the palace walls in shades of gold and amber, the pharaoh would emerge into the world transformed. His subjects would prostrate themselves not before a man, but before a living deity, their foreheads touching the ground that had been sanctified by his presence. They understood that to look directly upon the pharaoh was to glimpse the face of eternity itself. The pharaoh's word was law because it was believed to be the expression of divine will. When he spoke of building monuments that would last forever, of creating art that would capture the essence of beauty, of establishing principles of justice that would govern human behavior for all time, his people heard not impossible dreams, but sacred commandments. Yet the pharaoh was also achingly human. Behind the golden mask of divinity, he felt the weight of mortality, the knowledge that his flesh would one day return to dust, even as his spirit claimed eternal life. This tension between the mortal and the divine, between the temporal and the eternal, would drive the pharaohs to achievements that still astound us today. They understood that their true kingdom was not just the Egypt of the living, but the Egypt of the dead, not just the world of the present, but the world of forever. They ruled not just with the authority of kings, but with the vision of beings who had glimpsed the architecture of eternity and found it beautiful beyond description. In the evening, as the sun began its journey into the underworld, the pharaoh would retire to his private chambers, where the weight of godhood could be set aside and the man beneath the crown could emerge. Here, in the soft glow of oil lamps, he would study the ancient texts, seeking wisdom from the gods, preparing for the journey that all pharaohs must eventually make, the journey from this world to the next, from mortality to true immortality. The pharaoh's greatest responsibility was not to his subjects but to the future, to ensure that when his time came to join the gods in the afterlife, he would be remembered not just as a ruler, but as a bridge between worlds, a guardian of secrets, a keeper of the sacred flame that would illuminate the darkness of ignorance for all generations to come. And so in the gentle embrace of the Egyptian night, under stars that had witnessed the birth of gods and the dreams of men, the institution of divine kingship took root in the fertile soil of human imagination, growing into a tradition that would endure for over 3,000 years, shaping the destiny of a civilization that dared to believe that mortals could become eternal. In the shadow of eternity, men dared to build a mountain. Picture the moment when Khufu, fourth pharaoh of the fourth dynasty, stood on the plateau of Giza and pointed toward the sky. The desert wind whipped his royal garments as he gazed upon the empty expanse of limestone bedrock, but in his mind's eye he saw something that had never existed before, a perfect geometric form that would touch the heavens and last forever. The Great Pyramid. Even the name carries the weight of impossibility, the audacity of a dream made manifest in stone. This was not merely a tomb, but a machine for transformation, a gateway between worlds, a monument to the belief that human will, guided by divine vision, could create something truly eternal. Imagine the first morning when the workers arrived at Giza. The sun was just breaking over the eastern horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. Thousands of men, Not slaves, as Hollywood would have us believe, but skilled craftsmen, proud workers who were well-fed and honored for their service, gathered around the foundation stones that had been laid with mathematical precision. The air was thick with anticipation, and the scent of desert flowers that bloomed briefly after the rare rains. The workers carried with them not just their tools but their dreams, their understanding that they were participating in something far greater than mere construction. They were building eternity itself, stone by stone, block by block, breath by breath. The project would take nearly 2 decades to complete, but in those early days the workers could feel the monument's future presence like a living thing. The pyramid existed first in the realm of pure intention, in the sacred geometry that connected earth to sky, in the prayers whispered by priests who understood that they were midwiving the birth of something miraculous. Each limestone block, weighing as much as 15 men, was cut with a precision that still puzzles engineers today. The workers would run their hands along the smooth surfaces, feeling for imperfections that might disturb the pyramid's perfect harmony. They understood that their work was not just about moving stone, but about creating a resonance between the physical and spiritual worlds. As the pyramid grew, layer by layer, the workers developed an almost mystical relationship with their creation. They could feel its weight settling into the earth, its mass creating subtle changes in the very fabric of space around it. Some claimed they could hear it humming in the pre-dawn silence, a low, almost inaudible vibration that seemed to connect the monument to the rotation of the earth itself. The interior chambers were carved with the reverence of prayer. The king's chamber, where Khufu's sarcophagus would eventually rest, was aligned with perfect precision to the stars. The workers who shaped this sacred space worked in whispered silence, understanding that they were creating not just a room, but a launching pad for the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife. The Queen's Chamber, despite its name, was likely intended for a different purpose entirely. Perhaps as a symbolic womb where the pharaoh's spirit could be reborn, or as a resonance chamber where the geometry of the pyramid could transform sound into something approaching the voice of the gods. The Grand Gallery, that magnificent ascending passage that leads to the King's Chamber, was built like a cathedral of stone. Its corbelled walls rise in 7 steps, each level representing a stage in the pharaoh's transformation from mortal king to divine being. Workers who labored in this space reported strange experiences, sounds that seemed to come from nowhere, lights that flickered in the darkness, dreams that felt more real than waking life. As the pyramid neared completion, something extraordinary began to happen. The monument started to create its own weather, the massive stone structure, absorbing heat during the day and radiating it at night, created air currents that drew moisture from the desert and formed clouds around its apex. The workers took this as a sign that their creation was becoming a living thing, a bridge between the earthly and celestial realms. The final capstone, the pyramidion, was covered in gleaming white limestone and possibly topped with gold or electrum. When the sun struck it at dawn, the entire pyramid would blaze like a beacon, visible from miles away. The workers who placed this final stone understood that they were not just completing a building, but activating a cosmic machine, setting in motion forces that would resonate through eternity. On the day of the pyramid's completion, the workers stood back and gazed upon what they had created. The perfect geometric form rose from the desert floor like a crystal of pure intention, its surfaces so smooth they seemed to glow with inner light. The pyramid cast no shadow at noon, when the sun stood directly overhead, as if it existed partially outside the normal laws of physics. The workers could feel the monument's presence in their bones, a subtle vibration that seemed to tune their bodies to the frequency of the earth itself. They understood that they had built something that would outlast not just their own lives, but the entire civilization that had created it. The pyramid would stand as a testament to human possibility, a proof that mortals could indeed create something eternal. As evening fell on that first day after completion, the workers gathered around the pyramid's base and watched as the dying sun painted its surfaces in shades of gold and crimson. They felt a deep satisfaction, but also a strange melancholy. They had touched the infinite, had participated in the creation of something that transcended human understanding, and now they must return to their ordinary lives, carrying within them the memory of having helped birth a miracle. The Great Pyramid stood complete, a perfect fusion of human ambition and divine inspiration, a monument that would inspire wonder and speculation for thousands of years to come. It was more than a tomb. It was a promise, a declaration that consciousness itself might be as eternal as the geometric perfection that housed it. In the desert where time moves like flowing sand, there sits a creature that is both ancient and eternal, both human and divine, both question and answer. The Great Sphinx of Giza emerges from the earth like a dream made manifest in stone, its leonine body stretching across the desert floor, while its human face gazes with timeless patience toward the rising sun. For over 4,000 years, it has kept its silent vigil, weathered by countless sandstorms, witness to the rise and fall of empires, guardian of mysteries that pierce the very heart of existence. Imagine the moment of its creation, when master sculptors stood before a natural outcropping of limestone and saw within its rough form the shape of something magnificent. The rock itself seemed to whisper its desire to become something more than mere stone, to transform into a being that would bridge the gap between the earthly and the divine. The workers began their sacred task in the cool pre-dawn hours, when the desert air was still soft with the memory of night. They carried with them not just their tools, but their dreams, their understanding that they were not merely carving stone, but awakening something that had been sleeping in the earth for millions of years. Each strike of the chisel was a prayer, each carved line a word in a language older than speech. The Sphinx's human head, many believe, bears the features of Pharaoh Khafra, the pyramid builder who commissioned its creation. But others whisper that the face is far older, that it represents something more archetypal, the eternal human consciousness that seeks to understand its place in the cosmic order. The eyes, carved with infinite care, seem to hold within them the accumulated wisdom of ages, the patient knowledge of one who has seen the sun rise and set over 14 million times. The body, that magnificent lion form, speaks to the raw power of nature itself. Lions were sacred to the ancient Egyptians, symbols of strength and courage, guardians of the solar deity Ra. But this lion is different. It is a creature of contemplation rather than action, of watching rather than hunting. Its powerful muscles, suggested in the flowing lines of the stone, are relaxed in eternal rest, as if it has found perfect peace in its eternal vigilance. Between the massive paws of the Sphinx lies a granite stela, placed there by a young prince who would become Thutmose IV. The stela tells of a dream in which the Sphinx spoke to the sleeping prince, promising him the throne of Egypt if he would clear away the sand that had accumulated over the centuries. The prince obeyed, and the Sphinx kept its promise, demonstrating that even in stone, the ancient guardian possessed the power to shape destiny. The Sphinx has always been associated with riddles, most famously in the Greek myth of Oedipus. But the true riddle of the Sphinx is not a puzzle to be solved, but a mystery to be contemplated. It asks not, what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening, but rather, what is the nature of consciousness itself? What is the relationship between the mortal and the eternal? How can the finite touch the infinite? As the sun rises each morning, the Sphinx receives the first rays of dawn light upon its face, and for a moment the ancient stone seems to glow with inner fire. The shadows cast by its features create an expression that changes throughout the day, sometimes stern, sometimes benevolent, sometimes tinged with an almost human sadness. Visitors who have spent time in its presence report feeling as if they are being observed by something vast and patient, something that knows their deepest secrets and loves them anyway. The Sphinx has weathered more than sandstorms and centuries. It has endured the contempt of conquerors who could not understand its purpose, the vandalism of those who feared its power, the neglect of ages that forgot its significance. Napoleon's soldiers famously used it for target practice, and one of the cannonballs they fired knocked off its nose, forever changing its expression but not its essential mystery. Yet through all these indignities, the Sphinx has maintained its vigil, its patience, its silent wisdom. It has watched civilizations rise and fall, has seen the Nile change course, has witnessed the transformation of the Green Valley into the desert wasteland that surrounds it today. Through it all, it has remained essentially unchanged, a constant in a world of flux, a symbol of the eternal human aspiration to transcend the limitations of mortality. In the soft light of evening, when the desert begins to cool and the first stars appear in the darkening sky, the Sphinx takes on an almost mystical quality. Its form becomes a silhouette against the sunset, a profile that seems to merge with the horizon itself. It is in these moments that visitors often report experiencing something beyond the ordinary, a sense of connection to something vast and ancient, a feeling that they are in the presence of a consciousness that spans millennia. The Sphinx has been called many things: guardian, oracle, riddle keeper, doorway to the underworld. But perhaps its truest function is as a mirror, reflecting back to each viewer their own deepest questions about the nature of existence. It asks each person who stands before it, what do you seek? What do you fear? What do you hope to become? Some say that the Sphinx is not merely a monument, but a kind of library, that hidden chambers beneath its body contain the lost wisdom of ancient civilizations, the accumulated knowledge of ages long forgotten. Others believe that it is a kind of antenna, designed to receive and transmit cosmic energies, to serve as a communication device between Earth and sky. But perhaps the truth is simpler and more profound. Perhaps the Sphinx is exactly what it appears to be, a being of stone and dream, of earth and sky, of question and answer. It is the eternal watcher, the patient guardian, the silent keeper of mysteries that can only be understood through direct experience rather than intellectual analysis. As the night deepens and the desert settles into its ancient rhythm of silence and star-filled contemplation, the Sphinx continues its eternal vigil, watching over the sands of time, guarding the secrets of eternity, waiting with infinite patience for the moment when humanity will finally understand the riddle it has been asking all along. In the hushed chambers of ancient temples, where shadows dance with lamplight and the air is thick with incense and mystery, scribes bent over papyrus scrolls, their reed pens moving with the precision of prayer. They were not merely writing, they were creating maps for the greatest journey any soul could take, guidebooks for the passage from life to death to life eternal. The Book of the Dead, though it was never called by that name in ancient times, was known to the Egyptians as the Book of Coming Forth by Day. It was not a single book, but a collection of spells, prayers, and instructions, each one a key to unlock the mysteries of the afterlife, each one a light to guide the soul through the darkness of death. Imagine the moment when a person of means, feeling the approach of their final earthly hour, would commission their own copy of this sacred text. The scribes would gather in the temple's scriptorium, where the morning light filtered through high windows and fell upon tables covered with the tools of transformation, papyrus, ink, brushes, and the accumulated wisdom of centuries. The creation of each Book of the Dead was a deeply personal and spiritual process. The scribes would begin by invoking the gods, asking for guidance as they prepared to write words that would literally determine the fate of a human soul. They understood that they were not merely copying text, but creating a living document, a spiritual technology that would function in realms beyond the physical world. The most famous of these texts is the Papyrus of Ani, a masterpiece of both spiritual wisdom and artistic beauty. Each page is illuminated with vivid scenes of the afterlife, painted in colors that still glow with otherworldly intensity: the deep blue of the night sky, the golden radiance of the sun god Ra, the rich black of the fertile earth, the bright red of life's blood. The opening spells of the Book of the Dead address the soul's immediate needs upon death: how to preserve consciousness as the body fails, how to recognize the various deities who will be encountered in the afterlife, how to navigate the treacherous paths of the underworld. These are not abstract theological concepts, but practical instructions, as detailed and specific as a modern GPS system. The soul, according to these texts, must first pass through the Hall of Two Truths, where it will face the judgment of Osiris, the god of the underworld. The heart of the deceased will be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice. If the heart is found to be heavier than the feather, weighed down by the burden of unrepented sins, it will be devoured by Amit, the soul eater, and the person will cease to exist. But the Book of the Dead is not content merely to describe this terrifying possibility. It provides spells to purify the heart, prayers to invoke the protection of the gods, and instructions for the negative confession, a lengthy declaration in which the soul must truthfully deny having committed various sins. I have not killed, the soul must say. I have not stolen. I have not been cruel. I have not caused pain. The text includes the famous spell 125, which contains the complete instructions for the judgment scene. The soul must know the names of the 42 judges it will face, must understand the layout of the Hall of Two Truths, must be able to recite the proper responses to each question. This is not merely academic knowledge, but survival information for the soul's journey through death. Other spells in the Book of the Dead address more specific challenges the soul might face. Spell 7 allows the soul to transform into a hawk and fly above the dangers of the underworld. Spell 77 enables transformation into a golden falcon, a form associated with the sun god Ra. Spell 87 provides the ability to become a serpent, allowing the soul to move through narrow passages and hidden places. The text also includes spells for more mundane but essential needs: how to obtain food and water in the afterlife, how to avoid walking upside down, how to prevent the soul from rotting or being forgotten. These concerns reveal the deeply practical nature of ancient Egyptian afterlife beliefs. The dead were not expected to become bodiless spirits, but to continue existing as complete beings with physical needs and desires. The Book of the Dead describes an afterlife that is not static but dynamic, not a place of eternal rest, but of continued growth and transformation. The soul that successfully navigates the trials of death becomes an Aksh, a transformed being of light and power, capable of traveling freely between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The wealthy would have their Books of the Dead illustrated with scenes of their own afterlife journey. These vignettes show the deceased in various situations, standing before Osiris, sailing in the solar bark of Ra, working in the fields of the afterlife, enjoying eternal banquets with the gods. The images are not merely decorative but functional, serving as visual anchors for the soul's consciousness during its journey through death. The scribes who created these texts understood that they were dealing with forces beyond ordinary human comprehension. They worked in a state of ritual purity, often fasting and performing purification ceremonies before beginning their sacred task. They believed that the words they wrote would continue to function long after their own deaths, serving as guideposts for souls traveling through the timeless realm of eternity. As the sun would set over the temple complex, painting the walls in shades of gold and crimson, the scribes would carefully roll up their completed papyri knowing that they had created something far more valuable than any earthly treasure. They had made maps of eternity, instruction manuals for immortality, keys to unlock the greatest mystery of all, the nature of consciousness itself and its relationship to the infinite. The Book of the Dead stands as one of humanity's most profound attempts to understand and prepare for the ultimate mystery. It is a testament to the ancient Egyptian belief that death is not an ending, but a transformation, not a wall, but a doorway, not a descent into darkness, but an ascent into light. In the golden light of Egypt's 18th dynasty, when the empire stretched from Nubia to the Euphrates, and the temples of Thebes gleamed with tributes from conquered lands, there arose a pharaoh who would shake the very foundations of the ancient world. His name was Akhenaten, and he carried within his heart a vision so radical, so revolutionary, that it would echo through the corridors of time for millennia to come. Imagine the moment when the young prince, still known as Amenhotep IV, stood in the shadow of the great temple of Karnak and felt the weight of tradition pressing down upon him like a crushing stone. All around him, the elaborate rituals of the old religion unfolded with mechanical precision, priests burning incense to hundreds of gods, worshippers prostrating themselves before animal-headed deities, the air thick with the smoke of sacrifice and the whispers of ancient prayers. But the prince's eyes were drawn upward, beyond the temple walls, to the blazing orb of the sun that hung in the perfect blue of the Egyptian sky. In that moment of solar communion, he experienced something that would change not just his own life, but the entire course of human spiritual evolution. He saw, or believed he saw, the truth behind all the elaborate mythology of Egypt, that there was only one God, one source of all light and life, one divine consciousness that manifested itself in the visible disk of the sun. The god he would name Aten was not the traditional Ra, the falcon-headed deity of the old religion, but something far more abstract and profound, the solar disk itself, the visible manifestation of the one true God. Aten was not anthropomorphic but purely symbolic, represented by the sun disk with rays extending downward, each ray ending in a small hand that offered the Ankh, the symbol of life, to the royal family. When Amenhotep IV ascended to the throne, he began slowly, carefully to implement his revolutionary vision. He changed his name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for Aten, and began to establish temples to his new god. These temples were unlike anything Egypt had ever seen, open to the sky rather than hidden in dark sanctuaries, filled with light rather than shadows, decorated with scenes of daily life rather than mythological narratives. The most radical act of Akhenaten's reign was his decision to abandon Thebes, the ancient capital with its powerful priesthood and established temples, and build an entirely new city dedicated to Aten. This city, which he called Akhetaten, meaning horizon of Aten, rose from the desert sands like a mirage made manifest, its white limestone buildings gleaming in the sunlight like jewels scattered across the valley floor. The new capital was a masterpiece of urban planning and artistic innovation. Wide boulevards ran parallel to the Nile, lined with gardens and fountains. The royal palace was built with unprecedented luxury, its walls decorated with scenes of the royal family in intimate moments. Akhenaten and his queen Nefertiti playing with their daughters, the family making offerings to Aten, the pharaoh and queen kissing under the benevolent rays of the sun disk. This emphasis on family life and human emotion was revolutionary in Egyptian art, which had traditionally focused on formal, stylized representations of divine kingship. Akhenaten's artists created works of unprecedented naturalism and emotional depth, showing the pharaoh not as a distant god-king, but as a loving father and husband, a human being blessed by divine favor, but still recognizably human. The new art style, known today as the Amarna style, was characterized by elongated forms, exaggerated features, and a sense of movement and life that was utterly foreign to traditional Egyptian aesthetics. Akhenaten himself was portrayed with an elongated skull, full lips, a prominent belly, and wide hips, features that may have reflected actual physical characteristics or may have been symbolic representations of his role as both mother and father to his people. The most famous work of art from this period is the limestone bust of Queen Nefertiti, whose name means "the beautiful one has come." The sculpture, with its perfect proportions and serene expression, captures not just physical beauty, but spiritual radiance, the inner light of one who has been touched by divine grace. Nefertiti was not merely Akhenaten's queen, but his co-ruler, his partner in the great religious revolution that would reshape Egyptian consciousness. The new religion of Aten was not simply monotheistic, but had qualities that would later be echoed in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Akhenaten taught that Aten was the creator of all life, the source of all light and energy, the divine consciousness that animated the universe. The famous Hymn to the Aten, possibly written by Akhenaten himself, contains passages that bear striking resemblances to Psalm 104 in the Hebrew Bible. "How manifold are your works," the hymn declares. "They are hidden from the face of man. O sole God, like whom there is no other. You did create the world according to your desire, whilst you were alone. All men, cattle, and wild beasts, whatever is on earth, going upon its feet, and what is on high, flying with its wings." But the revolution was not to last. The powerful priesthood of Amun, whose temples had been closed and whose gods had been declared false, worked tirelessly to undermine the new religion. The common people, confused by the abandonment of traditions that had sustained them for millennia, began to lose faith in their heretic pharaoh. The empire's borders, neglected in favor of religious reform, began to crumble under pressure from enemies who sensed weakness. When Akhenaten died, after a reign of just 17 years, his revolution died with him. His successor, the young Tutankhamun, was pressured to abandon Akhetaten and return to Thebes to restore the old gods and the old ways. The beautiful city in the desert was abandoned, its buildings left to crumble under the relentless assault of sand and time. The priests of the old religion worked systematically to erase all trace of the heretic pharaoh and his solar god. They chiseled Akhenaten's name from monuments, destroyed his statues, and declared his reign to be a time of darkness and chaos. For centuries, the very existence of Akhenaten was forgotten, his story buried beneath the sands of orthodox history. Yet something of his vision survived, carried forward in whispers and dreams, in the secret hearts of those who had glimpsed the possibility of a single, universal God of love and light. The seeds planted in the fertile soil of human consciousness during those 17 revolutionary years would eventually bloom again in other times and places, in other attempts to reach toward the divine unity that Akhenaten believed lay at the heart of all existence. As the sun sets over the ruins of Akhetaten, its dying light still falls upon the broken walls and scattered stones of the city that dared to worship light itself. In that golden radiance, one can almost hear the echo of ancient prayers, the whisper of a vision that was perhaps too beautiful, too pure, too revolutionary for its time. The heretic pharaoh sleeps now in the eternal embrace of his beloved Aten, but his dream of divine unity continues to shine like a star in the darkness of human spiritual longing. In a hidden valley on the west bank of the Nile, where the desert mountains rise like silent sentinels against the burning sky, lies the most sacred necropolis in all of Egypt. The Valley of the Kings, a place where pharaohs went to sleep the eternal sleep, where the boundary between life and death becomes as thin as morning mist, where the very stones seem to pulse with the accumulated power of centuries. Picture this desolate landscape in the pre-dawn darkness, when the air is cool and the stars still pierce the velvet sky like diamonds scattered on dark cloth. The valley mouth opens like a gateway to another world, its limestone cliffs glowing faintly in the starlight. Here in this place that the ancient Egyptians called the Great Place, the most powerful rulers in the history of the world chose to spend eternity. The valley was selected not by accident, but by divine inspiration. The ancient Egyptians saw in its pyramid-shaped peak, Al-Qurn, a natural representation of the sacred pyramid, a sign that this place was blessed by the gods. The mountain itself seemed to be a gigantic tomb, hollowed out by divine hands to receive the bodies and souls of god-kings. Imagine the procession that would wind its way into this sacred valley when a pharaoh died. The mummified body, wrapped in countless yards of linen and adorned with amulets of gold and precious stones, would be carried on a golden bark, followed by priests chanting prayers that had been old when the pyramids were young. The air would be thick with incense and the sound of mourning, but also with anticipation, for this was not an ending but a transformation, not a burial, but a birth into eternal life. The tomb itself would have been prepared for decades, its passages and chambers carved deep into the living rock by master craftsmen who worked by lamplight in the eternal darkness underground. The walls would be covered with scenes from the Book of the Dead, painted in colors so vivid they seemed to glow within a fire, deep blues like the night sky, brilliant golds like the sun at noon, rich reds like the lifeblood that connected all living things. The most magnificent of these tombs belongs to Seti I, a pharaoh of the 19th dynasty, whose burial chamber descends deep into the earth like a journey through the layers of reality itself. The ceiling of his sarcophagus chamber is painted with astronomical texts, showing the movement of stars and planets, the journey of the sun through the underworld, the eternal dance of celestial bodies that governs the rhythm of time itself. The corridors of Seti's tomb are covered with texts from the Book of Gates and the Book of Caverns, ancient guides to the afterlife that describe the pharaoh's journey through the 12 hours of the night. Each hour represents a different challenge, a different test of the soul's worthiness to join the gods in eternal life. The paintings show the pharaoh's bay, his spiritual essence, traveling through landscapes of fire and water, through gates guarded by fierce deities, through caverns filled with the spirits of the blessed dead. But it is the tomb of the boy King Tutankhamun that captured the world's imagination when it was discovered nearly intact by Howard Carter in 1922. Unlike the great tombs of more powerful pharaohs, Tutankhamun's burial place is relatively small and simple, but what it lacked in grandeur, it made up for in the treasures it contained, over 5,000 objects buried with the young pharaoh to ensure his comfort and power in the afterlife. Imagine Carter's trembling hands as he made that first small hole in the sealed doorway and held up a candle to peer into the darkness beyond. "Can you see anything?" his patron Lord Carnarvon asked anxiously. "Yes," Carter whispered, his voice barely audible in the dusty silence. "Wonderful things." And wonderful they were. Golden chariots, jeweled daggers, royal thrones inlaid with precious stones, the famous golden mask that covered the pharaoh's mummified head, its features so perfect they seemed to breathe with life. Each object was not merely decorative but functional, designed to serve the pharaoh in the complex geography of the afterlife. The golden mask itself is perhaps the most famous artifact from ancient Egypt, its serene features capturing something of the eternal peace that the pharaohs sought in death. The eyes, inlaid with obsidian and quartz, seem to gaze directly into the soul of anyone who looks upon them, carrying within their depths the accumulated wisdom of ages. The lips, curved in the faintest suggestion of a smile, seem to whisper secrets of immortality, promises of life beyond death that transcend the boundaries of mortality. But the Valley of the Kings holds darker secrets as well. Many of the tombs were robbed in antiquity, their treasures scattered and their mummies desecrated by thieves who cared nothing for the sacred nature of their task. The ancient Egyptians understood that death was only the beginning of the pharaoh's journey, and they took elaborate precautions to protect the royal burials, hidden passages, false chambers, deadly traps designed to deter grave robbers. Yet despite all these precautions, most of the tombs were violated within centuries of their completion. The mummies of the great pharaohs, Ramesses II, Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, were moved from tomb to tomb by loyal priests trying to stay ahead of the robbers, until finally they were hidden together in a secret cache where they lay undisturbed for nearly 3,000 years. When this cache was discovered in 1881, archaeologists found themselves face to face with some of the greatest rulers in human history. The mummies, still wrapped in their ancient bandages, still wore around their necks the amulets and charms that were meant to protect them on their journey through death. Their faces, preserved by the dry desert air and the skill of ancient embalmers, still bore the traces of the personalities that had once commanded empires and shaped the destiny of nations. As the sun sets over the Valley of the Kings, casting long shadows across the ancient tombs, one can almost feel the presence of these royal spirits, still keeping their eternal vigil in the darkness underground. The valley becomes a place where time itself seems suspended, where the boundary between past and present, between life and death, between mortal and divine, becomes as permeable as the desert air. The pharaohs sleep now in the museums of the world, their mummies displayed behind glass like sacred relics of a vanished age. But their spirits, the ancient Egyptians believed, still dwell in the eternal darkness of their tombs, still journey through the underworld each night with Ra, still participate in the cosmic drama of death and rebirth that governs all existence. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the valley is empty of tourists and the only sound is the whisper of wind through the ancient passages, it is said that you can still hear them, the ghostly footsteps of god-kings, the rustle of royal garments, the soft chanting of prayers that have echoed through these stone corridors for over 3,000 years. The Valley of the Kings remains what it has always been, a gateway to eternity, a doorway to the infinite, a place where the human soul confronts its own deepest mystery and finds, perhaps, something of the divine. In the dying light of ancient Egypt's glory, when the shadow of Rome stretched across the Mediterranean and the old gods whispered their final prayers, there arose a queen whose very name would become synonymous with beauty, power, and the tragic romance of a civilization in twilight. Cleopatra VII, last pharaoh of Egypt, last keeper of the ancient flame, stood at the crossroads of history like a figure from legend, her life a bridge between the world of the pharaohs and the world of emperors. Picture Alexandria as it was in Cleopatra's time, the greatest city in the Mediterranean world, a jewel of white marble and gleaming gold set like a crown upon the Egyptian coast. The great lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the world, stood nearly 400 feet tall, its beacon visible for 30 miles at sea, guiding ships from across the known world to the harbors of learning and commerce that made Alexandria the Paris, London, and New York of the ancient world combined. The city pulsed with life and learning, its streets filled with scholars and merchants, philosophers and poets, mathematicians and mystics from every corner of the civilized world. The famous Library of Alexandria housed the accumulated knowledge of humanity. Hundreds of thousands of scrolls containing the wisdom of Greece and Egypt, Babylon and Persia, India, and the far lands beyond the horizon of imagination. Into this world of infinite possibility was born Cleopatra, heir to a dynasty that traced its lineage back to Alexander the Great's general Ptolemy. She was not Egyptian by blood, but Macedonian Greek. Yet she was the first of her line to learn the Egyptian language, to study the ancient mysteries, to present herself as the true inheritor of pharaonic tradition. In her, the wisdom of Greece and the magic of Egypt found perfect fusion. Imagine the young Cleopatra in the halls of the palace, surrounded by the greatest teachers of her age, her mind absorbing knowledge like a sponge drinks water. She learned mathematics from the disciples of Euclid, rhetoric from the followers of Aristotle, astronomy from the heirs of Ptolemy the astronomer. But she also learned the ancient Egyptian arts, the reading of hieroglyphs, the performance of sacred rituals, the manipulation of the subtle forces that the pharaohs had wielded for millennia. She was said to speak 9 languages fluently and to be able to discourse knowledgeably on any subject under the sun. But her greatest gift was not intellectual but intuitive, the ability to read the human heart, to understand what people wanted most deeply, and to present herself as the fulfillment of their dreams. She was a master of theater, understanding that power was not just about armies and gold, but about the ability to capture and hold the human imagination. When Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria, in pursuit of his rival Pompey, he found a city in civil war, torn between Cleopatra and her younger brother Ptolemy the Fiend. The queen, just 21 years old, but already wise in the ways of power, arranged to meet the Roman general in the most dramatic way possible, smuggled into his presence wrapped in a carpet, emerging like Venus from the waves to dazzle him with her beauty and intelligence. The meeting between Caesar and Cleopatra was one of those moments when the axis of history shifts, when the personal becomes political and the political becomes mythic. Here was the master of the Roman world, the conqueror of Gaul, the man who had crossed the Rubicon and brought the Republic to its knees, meeting a queen who embodied the ancient wisdom of Egypt and the intellectual sophistication of Greece. Their love affair was more than romance. It was a collision between 2 worlds, 2 different concepts of power and divinity. Caesar saw in Cleopatra not just a beautiful woman, but a pathway to legitimacy in the East, a bridge to the ancient traditions that might give his new order the weight of eternal authority. Cleopatra saw in Caesar not just a powerful lover, but a protector for her kingdom, a shield against the rising tide of Roman expansion that threatened to sweep away the last remnants of pharaonic civilization. Together they sailed up the Nile on a golden barge, past the ancient temples and monuments that had stood for thousands of years, past the ruins of Memphis and the pyramids of Giza, past the tombs of pharaohs, whose names were already legend when Rome was still a collection of mud huts on 7 hills. It was a journey through time itself, a voyage into the deep past that both reminded them of Egypt's eternal glory and highlighted how precarious that glory had become. When Caesar was assassinated in Rome, Cleopatra found herself alone once again, her kingdom threatened by civil war and the ambitions of Caesar's successors. But she was not a woman to despair. She reinvented herself once more, this time for Mark Antony, Caesar's lieutenant, and one of the 3 men who divided the Roman world between them. Their first meeting, on her golden barge sailing down the river Cydnus in Asia Minor, was perhaps the most spectacular piece of theatre in ancient history. Cleopatra appeared dressed as Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Surrounded by servants costumed as cupids and sea nymphs, the barge itself decorated with purple sails and silver oars. The very air was perfumed with exotic incense, and the sound of flutes and harps created an atmosphere of divine romance. Antony, who had seen the pomp and pageantry of Roman triumph, had never witnessed anything like this vision of Eastern magnificence. He was completely captivated, not just by Cleopatra's beauty, but by the promise she represented, the promise of a different kind of empire, one that combined Roman power with Eastern wisdom, Western discipline with Oriental mystery. For nearly a decade, Antony and Cleopatra ruled the Eastern Mediterranean like a divine couple from Egyptian mythology. They proclaimed themselves the new Isis and Osiris, the reincarnation of the god and goddess who had brought civilization to the world. Their children were declared the rightful heirs, not just to Egypt, but to the entire legacy of Alexander the Great's empire. But the dream was not to last. Octavian, Caesar's heir, and the future Augustus could not tolerate the existence of a rival power in the East, especially one that challenged the Roman conception of order and authority. The final confrontation came at the Battle of Actium, where the combined fleets of Antony and Cleopatra faced the naval forces of Rome in a contest that would determine the fate of the ancient world. The battle was lost almost before it began. Cleopatra, seeing that defeat was inevitable, sailed away with her ships, and Antony, unable to live without her, followed. They returned to Alexandria to face their doom with the dignity befitting the last representatives of a glorious tradition. As Octavian's forces closed in on Alexandria, Cleopatra retreated to her mausoleum, surrounding herself with the treasures of Egypt and the memories of its vanished greatness. She chose to die by the bite of an asp, the sacred serpent of Egyptian royalty, transforming her death into a final act of pharaonic ritual. With her passing, the age of the pharaohs came to an end, and Egypt became merely another province in the Roman Empire. But Cleopatra's legacy transcended death. In her, the ancient world glimpsed a vision of what might have been, a synthesis of East and West, of reason and mystery, of power and beauty that might have created a different kind of civilization entirely. She remains eternal in human memory, not just as the last pharaoh, but as the embodiment of ancient Egypt's enduring magic, a reminder that some dreams are too beautiful to die, even when the civilizations that dreamed them have crumbled to dust. In the sacred precincts of Karnak, where colossal columns rise like a forest of stone toward the infinite blue of the Egyptian sky, the ancient mysteries unfold in whispered prayers and sacred gestures that have echoed through these hallowed halls for over 2,000 years. This is not merely a place of worship, but a universe unto itself, a cosmic diagram carved in stone where the divine and mortal worlds intersect in patterns too profound for ordinary comprehension. Imagine approaching this vast temple complex in the cool pre-dawn darkness, when the air is still soft with the memory of night and the first stars are fading into the growing light of Ra's return. The great pylons rise before you like mountains carved by gods, their surfaces covered with hieroglyphs that tell stories of creation and conquest, of divine love and cosmic order. The temple was not built all at once, but grew over centuries like a living thing, each pharaoh adding his own vision to the sacred architecture. The result is a maze of courts and corridors, chambers and chapels, each one designed to lead the worshipper deeper into the mystery, closer to the heart of divine truth. Walking through Karnak is like moving through the layers of reality itself, from the outer world of ordinary consciousness into the inner sanctum where human awareness touches the infinite. The great hypostyle hall stands as perhaps the most magnificent achievement of ancient Egyptian architecture, a forest of 134 massive columns, each one carved and painted with scenes of pharaohs making offerings to the gods. The central columns tower nearly 70 feet above the stone floor, their lotus and papyrus capitals blooming in eternal stone toward a ceiling that was once painted to represent the night sky, complete with golden stars that caught and reflected the light of sacred lamps. Imagine the effect of entering this hall during the great festivals, when thousands of oil lamps illuminated the painted reliefs, and the air was thick with incense and chanting. The massive columns would seem to sway and dance in the flickering light, the painted figures appearing to move and breathe as if the stone itself had come alive. This was deliberate. The ancient architects understood that the physical environment could induce altered states of consciousness, could prepare the mind for direct encounter with the divine. The deeper chambers of the temple were reserved for the initiated priests, those who had spent years learning the complex rituals and sacred knowledge necessary to serve the gods. These inner sanctuaries were kept in perpetual darkness, lit only by the flames of sacred lamps and the golden gleam of cult statues that were believed to house the actual presence of the deities themselves. The most sacred ritual performed in these temples was the daily feeding and clothing of the god. Each morning, the high priest would enter the Holy of Holies, break the clay seals that had been placed on the shrine the previous evening, and open the doors to reveal the golden statue within. The god would be awakened with hymns and prayers, washed with sacred water, anointed with precious oils, dressed in fine linen, and offered the finest food and drink. This was not symbolic worship, but literal care. The ancient Egyptians believed that the gods required physical sustenance and attention just as humans did. The relationship between deity and worshipper was intimate and personal, more like the bond between family members than the distant reverence we might expect in religious observance. The priests who performed these rituals were not merely religious functionaries but magicians and healers, astronomers and mathematicians, keepers of ancient wisdom that spanned every aspect of human knowledge. They understood that the temple was not just a place of worship, but a school for the soul, a laboratory where consciousness could be refined and expanded through contact with cosmic forces. The walls of the temple served as a vast library covered with hieroglyphic texts that contained not just religious formulas, but medical knowledge, astronomical observations, mathematical calculations, and philosophical insights. These texts were studied by generations of priests who understood that all knowledge was sacred, that the distinction between science and religion was a false one that limited human understanding. In the temple workshops, master craftsmen created the objects used in ritual: golden vessels, precious amulets, incense burners, and the elaborate costumes worn by priests during ceremonies. Each object was made according to precise specifications laid down in ancient texts, for the Egyptians understood that the physical forms used in ritual had to conform to cosmic patterns if they were to be effective in bridging the gap between heaven and earth. The temple also served as a healing center, where those suffering from physical or spiritual ailments could come to seek the intervention of the gods. The process of healing was understood to be not just medical, but magical, the restoration of harmony between the individual soul and the cosmic order. Priests trained in the healing arts would use a combination of herbal medicines, surgical procedures, and magical rituals to restore their patients to health. Some of the most profound mysteries were celebrated during the great festivals that marked the turning points of the Egyptian year. The festival of Opet, celebrated at Karnak during the flood season, involved carrying the sacred barks of the gods from Karnak to Luxor Temple in a great procession that lasted for weeks. The entire population of Thebes would participate, creating a citywide celebration that transformed ordinary consciousness into collective religious ecstasy. During these festivals, the boundaries between the sacred and profane, between priest and worshipper, between human and divine, would dissolve in the overwhelming experience of communal worship. The gods were believed to descend from their celestial realms to walk among their people, blessing them with prosperity and wisdom, healing their ailments and fulfilling their deepest desires. The mystery schools associated with the temples taught advanced students the secret doctrines that were too powerful to be shared with the general population. These teachings concerned the true nature of the soul, the structure of the cosmos, the techniques of spiritual transformation that could enable a human being to achieve divine consciousness while still living in a physical body. Students in these schools would undergo years of preparation, purification rituals, meditation practices, study of sacred texts, and direct training from masters who had themselves achieved various degrees of enlightenment. The goal was not just intellectual understanding, but direct experience of the divine, the mystical union that the Egyptians called becoming one with Ra. As the sun sets over the temple complex, casting long shadows across the ancient stones, the mysteries continue to unfold. Though the priests are gone and the rituals no longer performed, the temple itself remains a vessel for transformation, a place where sensitive souls can still feel the presence of forces that transcend ordinary understanding. The stones remember the prayers that were offered here, the wisdom that was taught, the love that connected heaven and earth in bonds too strong for time to break. In the gathering darkness, as the first stars appear in the desert sky, Karnak becomes what it has always been, a doorway to the infinite, a bridge between worlds, a reminder that the human soul is capable of touching the divine and finding in that touch the meaning and purpose for which it was created. In the soft glow of oil lamps that flicker against the walls of ancient workshops, master artists bent over blocks of pristine limestone, their copper chisels moving with the precision of prayer, their eyes focused not on mere decoration, but on the creation of eternal beauty. They understood that they were not simply making art, but capturing the essence of life itself, freezing moments of divine perfection in stone and pigment that would outlast the very civilization that created them. Egyptian art was never art for art's sake, but art for eternity's sake, created according to sacred principles that connected the physical world to the realm of the gods. Every line, every color, every proportion was governed by cosmic law designed to ensure that the works would continue to function as magical instruments long after their creators had joined the ancestors in the field of reeds. Imagine the workshop of a master sculptor in Memphis, where the air is thick with limestone dust, and the sound of chisels against stone creates a rhythm like temple drums. The artisan holds in his hands not just a tool, but a sacred implement, understanding that each strike is both creative act and religious ritual. He works not from his own imagination, but from patterns established by the gods themselves at the moment of creation. The principles of Egyptian art were not arbitrary conventions, but reflections of cosmic order. The frontal pose of standing figures, with left foot forward and arms at the sides, represented the eternal soul at rest in divine perfection. The profile view of faces combined with frontal torsos showed the human form from its most characteristic and recognizable angles, ensuring that the essence of the person would be clearly conveyed to both earthly viewers and divine observers. The use of hierarchical scale, where more important figures are shown larger than less important ones, reflected the Egyptian understanding that spiritual significance was more important than physical reality. In tomb paintings showing the deceased making offerings to the gods, the human figure might be shown smaller than the deity, but larger than the servants who attend the ceremony, creating a visual map of cosmic hierarchy. Color in Egyptian art was never merely decorative, but carried profound symbolic meaning. Gold represented the flesh of the gods, eternal and incorruptible. Blue symbolized the heavens and the life-giving waters of the Nile. Red indicated life, power, and victory over chaos. Black represented the fertile soil of Egypt and the regenerative power of death. White signified purity, sacred power, and divine protection. The artists who worked on royal tombs understood that their paintings were not meant to be seen by human eyes, but by the spiritual vision of the deceased and the gods. Working by lamplight in chambers deep underground, they created scenes of such beauty and perfection that they seem to glow with inner light even today. These paintings were magical instruments designed to ensure that the afterlife of the deceased would be as beautiful and abundant as the images that surrounded them. The famous tomb paintings of Nebamun, now in the British Museum, show the deceased hunting birds in the marshes of the afterlife, surrounded by his family and accompanied by his cat. The scene captures not just a moment of leisure, but a state of eternal bliss where the soul enjoys forever the pleasures that made life worth living. Every detail, the flutter of duck wings, the ripple of water through papyrus reeds, the delicate jewelry worn by Nebamun's wife, is rendered with loving precision, that transforms observation into devotion. The creation of a royal portrait required not just artistic skill but deep spiritual understanding. The sculptor working on a statue of the pharaoh was not creating a mere likeness, but fashioning a dwelling place for the royal Ka, the spiritual double that would need a physical form in which to manifest. The eyes of the statue were often inlaid with crystal and obsidian to give them a lifelike appearance, for the Egyptians believed that the soul could literally look out through these stone eyes and observe the world of the living. The workshops where these masterpieces were created were attached to temples and palaces, their artisans holding positions of honor and respect. The master sculptor Thutmose, who created the famous bust of Nefertiti, was clearly an artist of extraordinary skill and sensitivity, able to capture in limestone not just the queen's physical beauty, but her spiritual radiance, the inner light that marked her as one touched by divine grace. The techniques used by Egyptian artists were passed down through generations of master-apprentice relationships, preserved in workshops that functioned like medieval guilds. Young artists would spend years learning not just how to carve stone or mix pigments, but how to understand the sacred principles that governed their art. They studied the proportional systems that ensured divine harmony, the symbolic meanings of colors and forms, the ritual purity required for working on sacred commissions. The relief carvings that cover temple walls were created through a complex process that combined artistic vision with religious devotion. First, master draftsmen would sketch the scenes in red ochre, laying out the compositions according to strict proportional grids. Then sculptors would carve the figures in either raised or sunken relief, their chisels following lines established by divine law. Finally, painters would apply the colors, their pigments mixed according to ancient formulas that ensured permanence and spiritual effectiveness. The result of this collaborative process was art that transcended individual creativity to achieve collective perfection. The anonymous artists who created the great masterpieces of Egyptian art subordinated their personal vision to cosmic vision, understanding that true beauty emerged not from self-expression, but from selfless service to eternal principles. The golden mask of Tutankhamun represents the pinnacle of Egyptian artistic achievement, a work that combines technical mastery with spiritual profundity in equal measure. Every detail of the mask, from the cobra and vulture on the forehead to the intricate patterns of the collar, carries symbolic meaning related to the pharaoh's divine nature and eternal destiny. The gold itself was understood to be the flesh of the gods, making the mask not just a funerary object, but a divine transformation, turning the mortal king into an immortal deity. In the painted tombs of the nobles at Thebes, artists created scenes of daily life that transformed the ordinary into the eternal. Farmers harvesting grain, craftsmen at their trades, musicians and dancers entertaining at banquets. All these activities are shown not as they appeared to earthly eyes, but as they would exist in the perfected realm of the afterlife, where all labor is joy and all pleasure is infinite. The art of ancient Egypt was created not for museums but for eternity, not for human appreciation but for divine function. Yet in transcending its immediate purpose, it achieved a kind of beauty that speaks directly to the human soul across the centuries. In the perfect proportions of a standing pharaoh, in the graceful curve of a queen's smile, in the delicate hieroglyphs that flow like poetry across stone walls, we glimpse something of the divine vision that inspired these ancient masters. As the sun sets over the Valley of the Kings, its dying light falls upon painted walls that still gleam with colors mixed over 3,000 years ago. The artists who created these masterpieces are long dead, their names forgotten, their individual personalities lost to time. But their vision lives on, captured in stone and pigment, continuing to work its magic on all who encounter it, proving that true art is indeed eternal, outlasting the civilizations that create it and speaking to the deepest aspirations of the human spirit. In the gentle pre-dawn light that bathes the ancient temples of Egypt, where the air is soft with the scent of frankincense and myrrh, there moves a world within the world, a sacred kingdom where animals are not mere beasts, but living embodiments of divine power, bridges between the earthly and celestial realms, keepers of mysteries that human reason alone cannot fathom. Imagine walking through the courtyards of the Temple of Bastet at Bubastis, where hundreds of cats pad silently through the shadowed corridors, their eyes gleaming like golden coins in the lamplight. These are not ordinary felines, but sacred beings, each one believed to carry within its sleek form a spark of divine consciousness, a fragment of the cosmic force that maintains the balance between order and chaos. The ancient Egyptians saw in animals qualities that they themselves aspired to possess: the keen sight of the falcon, the protective ferocity of the lioness, the patient wisdom of the crocodile, the nurturing devotion of the cow. In the natural behaviors of these creatures, they read the very laws that govern the universe, understanding that animals lived in harmony with cosmic rhythms that humans had forgotten in their pursuit of civilization. The ibis, with its long curved beak and elegant stride, became sacred to Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing. Priests observed how these birds would probe the mud of the Nile with mathematical precision, their feeding patterns following geometric principles that seemed to mirror the sacred proportions used in temple architecture. In the ibis's patient search for food, they saw an image of the divine mind searching through the chaos of existence to find the hidden patterns that create meaning and order. The sacred bulls of Memphis lived in luxury that exceeded that of many humans, housed in magnificent temples, fed the finest grain, attended by priests who understood that they were caring for the living incarnation of Ptah, the creator god. The Apis bull was selected according to strict criteria. It had to be black with specific white markings, including a triangle on its forehead and the shape of an eagle on its back. When such a bull was found, it was brought to Memphis with great ceremony and installed as a living god. The death of an Apis bull was mourned throughout Egypt as the death of a deity. The bull would be mummified with the same care given to pharaohs, wrapped in the finest linen, adorned with golden amulets, and buried in a massive stone sarcophagus in the underground galleries of the Serapeum. The entire nation would go into mourning until a new Apis bull was found, for the Egyptians believed that the god could not leave the world without an earthly representative. In the temples dedicated to Sobek, the crocodile god, live crocodiles were kept in sacred pools, their ancient eyes reflecting wisdom that seemed to span geological ages. These creatures, unchanged since the dawn of time, represented the eternal principles that underlie the apparent chaos of natural processes. Priests would feed them sacred offerings and study their behavior for omens, understanding that these primordial beings possessed knowledge that predated human civilization. The cat, perhaps more than any other animal, captured the Egyptian imagination and held it for thousands of years. In the graceful feline form, they saw the perfect balance of gentleness and ferocity, independence and devotion, earthly sensuality and otherworldly mystery. The goddess Bastet, depicted as a cat or cat-headed woman, represented the protective aspects of the divine feminine, the fierce love that defends the innocent and nurtures new life. Egyptian families would keep cats not just as pets, but as sacred beings whose presence brought blessing and protection to the household. When a cat died, the family would shave their eyebrows in mourning and mummify the beloved animal with the same care given to human family members. The cat cemeteries of ancient Egypt contained millions of mummified felines, each one wrapped in linen and placed in decorated coffins, testament to the profound spiritual bond between humans and their sacred companions. The falcon soared through Egyptian consciousness as the living image of divine kingship and solar power. Horus, the falcon god, was believed to manifest in the living pharaoh, his keen eyes seeing all, his powerful wings protecting the land from harm. The speed and precision of the hunting falcon became a model for royal justice, swift, accurate, and merciless toward evil, but protective toward the innocent. In the sacred aviaries attached to temples, falcons and hawks were kept and trained not for hunting but for ritual purposes. These birds would be released during certain ceremonies, their flight patterns interpreted as messages from the gods. The sight of a falcon circling the temple at dawn was considered an especially powerful omen, a sign that the god was present and attentive to human prayers. The hippopotamus, despite its fearsome nature, was sacred to Taweret, the protective goddess of childbirth and fertility. In the massive, nurturing form of the female hippo, Egyptians saw an image of the primordial mother, the cosmic force that gives birth to all life and fiercely protects it from harm. Pregnant women would wear amulets in the shape of hippos, seeking the goddess's protection during the dangerous passage from pregnancy to motherhood. The scarab beetle, humble though it might appear, held perhaps the most profound symbolic meaning of all. The Egyptians observed how these small creatures would roll balls of dung across the sand, laying their eggs within these spheres of seeming waste. When the young beetles emerged, it appeared to the ancient observers as if life had spontaneously generated from lifeless matter, a perfect metaphor for resurrection and eternal renewal. The scarab became the symbol of Khepera, the god of the rising sun, who was believed to push the solar disk across the sky each day, just as the scarab pushed its ball across the earth. Millions of scarab amulets were carved from stone and precious materials, worn by the living for protection, and placed with the dead to ensure resurrection in the afterlife. Even the humble dung beetle was seen as a teacher of divine truth, its simple behavior revealing cosmic principles that governed all existence. In this, perhaps more than anywhere else, we see the profound wisdom of Egyptian animal worship, the understanding that the divine reveals itself not only in the mighty and magnificent, but in the small and seemingly insignificant, that every creature contains within itself some fragment of cosmic truth. The ancient Egyptians created elaborate funeral rituals for their sacred animals, understanding that these beings served as intermediaries between human consciousness and divine reality. The animal cemeteries of Egypt, vast underground galleries containing millions of mummified cats, ibises, crocodiles, and bulls, testify to a civilization that saw the sacred in all life, that understood that consciousness itself was not limited to human form, but flowed through all creation like a divine river. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the temple courtyards were empty of all but the sacred animals that called them home, ancient priests would observe these creatures with the attention of scientists and the devotion of mystics. They understood that they were watching living scriptures, breathing symbols, incarnate teachings about the nature of divine consciousness and its relationship to the physical world. The bond between humans and animals in ancient Egypt was not based on sentimentality, but on profound spiritual recognition, the understanding that all consciousness is one, that the divine spirit that animates human hearts also beats in the breast of the falcon, flows in the blood of the bull, and gleams in the golden eyes of the cat. In honoring their animal companions, the Egyptians honored the sacred force that connects all life in an unbreakable web of cosmic unity. As the sun rises over the ancient temples, casting its golden light upon the empty courtyards where sacred animals once lived and moved and had their being, we can still feel the presence of that ancient wisdom, still hear the echo of prayers that recognize the divine in every living creature, still sense the profound truth that the Egyptians understood so well, that we are all, human and animal alike, sparks of the same divine fire, notes in the same cosmic song, waves in the same infinite ocean of consciousness. In the soft twilight of a civilization that has passed into legend, as the shadows grow long across the sand-covered stones of ancient temples and the Nile continues its eternal journey toward the sea, we come to understand that Egypt did not truly die but transformed, its wisdom flowing like the sacred river into the consciousness of all humanity, its dreams becoming the inheritance of every soul that has ever gazed upon the stars and wondered about the nature of eternity. Picture the last hieroglyph being carved into temple stone, the final prayer being whispered in the sacred language of the pharaohs, the moment when the priests of Isis locked the doors of their temples for the last time and walked away into the desert twilight. It was not an ending but a metamorphosis, the transformation of a living tradition into an eternal symbol, the translation of earthly wisdom into timeless truth. The physical empire of the pharaohs lasted over 3,000 years, longer than any other civilization in human history. But its spiritual empire has lasted even longer, continuing to influence and inspire every generation that has encountered its monuments and mysteries. The Great Pyramid still stands as a testament to human possibility. The Sphinx still poses its eternal riddle, and the golden mask of Tutankhamun still gazes upon the world with eyes that seem to hold the secrets of immortality. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BCE, he did not merely add another province to his empire, but inherited a tradition of divine kingship that would transform his own understanding of power and destiny. He made the dangerous journey across the desert to the oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis, where he was proclaimed the son of the god, legitimizing his rule through connection to the most ancient traditions of sacred monarchy. The Ptolemaic dynasty that followed Alexander continued the pharaonic tradition for 3 more centuries, building new temples in the ancient style, maintaining the old rituals, and preserving the sacred knowledge that connected earth to heaven. Even as Egypt became increasingly Hellenized, the deeper currents of Egyptian spirituality continued to flow, mingling with Greek philosophy to create new streams of wisdom that would eventually flow into Christianity, Islam, and the esoteric traditions of the Western world. The early Christian monks who settled in the Egyptian desert were heirs to a tradition of spiritual seeking that reached back to the priests of ancient temples. The Coptic church that they founded preserved not only Christian teachings, but also fragments of ancient Egyptian wisdom, creating a synthesis that honored both the new revelation and the eternal truths that had been recognized in the Nile Valley for millennia. When Islam came to Egypt in the 7th century CE, it too was influenced by the deep spiritual currents that had shaped Egyptian consciousness for thousands of years. The mystical traditions of Sufism found fertile ground in the land of the pharaohs, where the quest for direct experience of the divine had been pursued with unmatched dedication and sophistication. The Renaissance rediscovery of ancient Egypt sparked an intellectual revolution that continues to this day. When European scholars first began to decipher hieroglyphs and explore the monuments of the pharaohs, they found not the primitive superstitions they had expected, but a sophisticated civilization whose understanding of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and theology challenged their assumptions about the progress of human knowledge. The Romantic poets saw in Egypt a vision of sublime antiquity, a civilization that had touched the infinite and left traces of its encounter carved in eternal stone. Shelley's Ozymandias captured the melancholy grandeur of pharaonic ambition, while Byron and Keats found in Egyptian imagery symbols for their own quest to touch the eternal through art and poetry. The archaeological discoveries of the 19th and 20th centuries, from the Rosetta Stone to the tomb of Tutankhamun to the library of Nag Hammadi, have continued to reveal new depths of Egyptian wisdom, new evidence of a civilization that understood truths about consciousness, spirituality, and the nature of reality that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. The influence of Egyptian symbolism on modern esoteric traditions is profound and continuing. The Egyptian tarot, the Hermetic tradition, the symbols of Freemasonry, the iconography of modern occultism, all draw upon the visual language and spiritual concepts first developed in the temples of ancient Egypt. The Ankh, the Eye of Horus, the Pyramid, the Sphinx. These symbols have become part of the universal vocabulary of spiritual seeking. Even in our secular age, Egypt continues to fascinate and inspire. Movies, novels, video games, and popular culture constantly return to Egyptian themes, finding in the land of the pharaohs a source of mystery and wonder that seems inexhaustible. Each generation rediscovers Egypt and finds in its monuments and myths reflections of their own deepest concerns and highest aspirations. The scientific study of Egyptian achievements continues to yield surprising discoveries. Computer modeling of the Great Pyramid reveals acoustic properties that may have been deliberately designed to induce altered states of consciousness. Analysis of ancient Egyptian medical texts shows sophisticated understanding of anatomy and surgical procedures. Archaeological evidence suggests levels of technological achievement that challenge our assumptions about ancient capabilities. But perhaps the most profound legacy of ancient Egypt lies not in its monuments or texts, but in its fundamental insight that human consciousness is capable of touching the infinite, that mortality and immortality are not opposites, but aspects of a greater unity, that the human soul is itself a divine spark capable of eternal existence. This understanding, first developed with unmatched clarity and sophistication in the temples and tombs of ancient Egypt, has become part of the spiritual inheritance of all humanity. Every tradition that teaches the immortality of the soul, every religion that promises eternal life, every philosophy that sees in human consciousness something that transcends the physical body, draws upon insights first articulated with breathtaking beauty and precision by the civilization of the pharaohs. As we stand today in the shadow of the pyramids, as we gaze into the timeless eyes of the Sphinx, as we walk through temples where prayers were offered for over 3,000 years, we are not merely tourists visiting ancient ruins, but pilgrims returning to one of the sources of human spiritual understanding. We are heirs to a tradition that stretches back to the very dawn of human civilization, inheritors of wisdom that is both utterly ancient and eternally relevant. The Nile still flows toward the sea, carrying within its waters the memory of all the civilizations that have risen and fallen along its banks. The desert wind still blows across the monuments of the pharaohs, whispering secrets that were old when Moses walked the earth, and that will remain true when our own civilization has become a memory. And in that flowing and that whispering, in the eternal dialogue between river and desert, between time and eternity, between the human and the divine, the spirit of ancient Egypt lives on, not as a relic of the past, but as a living force, a continuing presence, a reminder that what the human soul touches when it reaches toward the infinite is itself infinite, itself eternal, itself divine. In the end, this is the greatest mystery that ancient Egypt bequeathed to the world, not the riddle of how the pyramids were built or how the mummies were preserved, but the infinitely greater riddle of consciousness itself, the eternal question of what it means to be human in a universe that somehow has produced beings capable of asking such questions, capable of seeking such answers, capable of touching, however briefly, the face of eternity itself. And so our journey through the mysteries of ancient Egypt comes to its close, not with an ending, but with a transformation, not with answers, but with deeper questions, not with the satisfaction of knowledge acquired, but with the humble recognition that the greatest mysteries remain forever beyond our complete understanding, forever calling us forward into greater depths of wonder, forever whispering that we too are children of the eternal, heirs to the infinite, sparks of the same divine fire, that burned so brightly in the temples of the pharaohs and burns still in every human heart that seeks truth, beauty, and meaning in the vast mystery of existence. Sleep well, dreamer. Let the sands of time carry you gently into the realm of dreams, where the ancient wisdom of Egypt awaits you in the kingdom of eternal night.